The ancient world was full of horrors, and what better time to talk about them than the Halloween season. This Ancient Horrors Iceberg contains spooky and creepy stuff that spans across every ancient civilization and time period in history. I've included stuff like the curse of King Tut's tomb, ancient blood sacrifices, and even the existential question, what if the ancient gods were real? We've got those and many more, so join me right now as we get started with Tier 1. We're going to start with Tier 1 of the iceberg, which is going to be ancient horrors that you've most likely heard of. Let's start with the curse of King Tut's tomb. This is probably the most famous ancient horror of all time. In November of 1922, the British archaeologist Howard Carter opened the tomb of King Tut. Now, like the rest of ancient Egyptian tombs, this thing had been sealed for over 3,000 years. Once it was unsealed though, there was no going back. Around 10 people who were there whenever the tomb was unsealed or shortly thereafter died. Now, they didn't all die immediately, but some of them did. To start with, the guy that financed the expedition of Howard Carter passed away within months. This was a guy named George Herbert. He was there when the tomb was open, and 4 months and 7 days later, he passed away from an infected mosquito bite. Now, keep in mind, this was 1923. This was not the 1600s. Legend has it that as George Herbert died, all the lights in Cairo, Egypt went out. Now, that might just be a legend, but it's pretty creepy. A guy named George J. Gold got a fever while he was there at the tomb, and he passed away soon after also. A guy named Arthur Mace, who was on Howard Carter's team, passed away about 5 years after of pneumonia also. Howard Carter himself lasted 16 years after unsealing the tomb, but a lot of people say that he also passed away due to the curse. So do you think the curse is real, or is there an actual explanation for it? The best I've got is that there's a toxic spore that might have been present in the tomb. When they unsealed it, everybody that was there got infected by it and caused pneumonia and whatever killed them all. Pompeii's cursed plaster casts. In the year 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, covering Pompeii in ash. That's one of the great fears of every human ever. You never know when a volcano could erupt and just end your life. The thing is, everyone originally believed that the gas and the ash is what killed all these people in Pompeii, but that's really not what did it. In 1863, archaeologists went to Pompeii and started figuring out how to preserve the dead bodies. They would make plaster casts, and sometimes they would have to pour them around dead bodies that were buried under stuff, but they would eventually dig them out. What they found was horrifying. These people died in absolute agony. Some were screaming, some were grabbing their throats. There were children that obviously had bash marks on them. It was awful. You'd have groups of people that died together, all hiding in like a basement or something like that. These casts preserve some of the worst moments in all of human history. Nobody has an exact total of how many people perished that day, but around 25,000 probably did. If you ever find yourself touring Pompeii, prepare for the worst. Thank you so much for watching this Halloween-based special on this channel. It means more to me than you'll ever know. If you're enjoying it, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a ton. And now, let's get back into it. The Screaming Mummy. Also known as Unknown Man E, this Screaming Mummy was found in the Deir al-Bahari cache in Egypt. Now, if you take a good look at this mummy, he is screaming in agony. Apparently, he suffered a very painful death, so much so that they even made his corpse look like that on purpose. It was some sort of humiliation thing, probably. This makes more sense when we look at who this mummy probably was. DNA tests suggest that he was an Egyptian prince named Pentower who lived during the 12th century BC. Now, what's so special about this guy? Why did he deserve this agony? Long story short, he himself probably didn't. His mother was a woman named Taye who conspired with a bunch of other people under the pharaoh to overthrow the pharaoh who was Pentower's father and place Pentower himself on the throne. Now, his father, Rameses III, was killed, but that's not the end of the story. The rightful heir, Rameses IV, was able to take control of the situation and stop the coup, basically. He seized power like he was supposed to after the death of his father, and then Pentower himself was made an example of. Now, Pentower was given two options. He could either take some poison and end his own life, or he could suffer the public execution of everybody else. His remains suggest that he was probably either strangled or hanged, so he didn't take the poison. That's why he was screaming eternally. It's horrifying that his face still looks like this after 3,000 years. Ancient mass child sacrifices at Carthage. If you're familiar at all with Carthage, you've heard of the Carthaginian Tophits. These Tophits or Tophits, however you say that, are a combination of a necropolis and a sanctuary. The most horrifying part about these Tophits within this necropolis is that within these graves are children. Now, there's tons of ancient sources that say that the Carthaginians sacrificed their children, but up until recently, we thought that that was anti-Carthaginian propaganda. The Greeks and the Romans did not like the Carthaginians at all. Actually, they were at war with them most of the time, so that's why we thought they said this stuff. Now, these Tophits were sanctuaries dedicated to the gods Tanit and Baal, and if you know anything about them, it's long said in the Bible and stuff that, you know, child sacrifices were offered up to them. Just like the anti-Carthage Greek and Roman propaganda, most people think that, you know, the Bible is going to be a biased source against these people, against the Phoenicians, so that's why it says this. But here's some evidence. There are thousands of urns buried in these Tophets, and within a lot of them, actually around 340 of them, are the remains of children. Now, a certain researcher named Patricia Smith and her team researched a lot of these urns, and they determined that the children that are under 3 months old probably died of something other than natural causes. That means sacrifice. This was a terrible practice even then, whenever infant mortality rates were very high, but now it's just unheard of. I'm not going to try to convince you that the Carthaginian people were evil and they were for sure killing these children for no reason other than to sacrifice them up to their false gods or whatever, but anyway, that's up for you to decide. That's all I'm going to say. The Oracle of Delphi's possessions. For up to around 1200 years in ancient Greece, there was a temple of Apollo at Delphi. At that temple, there was an oracle who would receive his prophecies and go crazy with them. Apparently, whenever she was receiving these prophecies and relaying them out to whoever was around her, this stuff was terrifying. Now, obviously, there's more than one she. Not one person is going to live for 1200 years and give these prophecies, but anyway, she would have convulsions, she would violently thrash around, she would scream. It was crazy stuff, apparently. This was what they would call back then the divine possessions of Apollo, because he was apparently living there at that temple, or he had control of that temple for 9 months of the year. He would leave during the winter for some reason, whatever that reason was. But anyway, it turns out she probably was having these crazy reactions whenever she was trying to prophesy, because there were toxic gases emitting from the basement of this place. There was a hot spring that flowed underneath this temple, underneath this sanctuary. During the warm months of the year, it would have been warmer than any other time and given off more gases than any other time. Researchers suspect that it was the gases like ethylene or methane or something like that that would be hallucinogenic and literally make her trip. She apparently also smoked oleander, which would absolutely induce this kind of fits and stuff like that going on, because that's not good for you. You're not supposed to breathe that stuff in. The oracle could also only go to this prophetic chamber once a month, and obviously that's because if she went anymore, she would just die from all the gases. I'm sure this was absolutely crazy to the people back then. They were creeped out by these possessions and literally thought that the gods were speaking to them, but it was probably just gas. Now let's move on to tier 2. The Terracotta Army's ghost stories. If you're unaware, the Terracotta Army is quite literally an army of life-size terracotta figures that once served the Emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. He was the first emperor of the United China, and he has a massive burial complex as a result. Supposedly, this army of terracotta soldiers is placed there to protect Qin Shi Huang in the afterlife. I could talk about Qin Shi Huang's tomb and this terracotta army forever, but what's the ghost stories part about? Well, Chinese folklore and legends say that as this tomb was dug and these terracotta army figures were created, everybody who worked on it was buried alive within this complex. This is probably not too far off from the truth, because in 2003 we excavated a pit that had like a mass grave of site workers. They were probably servants or slaves or something like that, and they were literally all just killed and put right there in the ground. According to legend, all this was to protect the mausoleum's secret so that nobody knew it was there, nobody knew the scale of the thing, which it's 38 square miles big, which is massive. Now, local residents around this area have heard stories and just heard things for hundreds of years. They hear sounds echoing from these pits at night. They feel eyes on them at all times whenever they're around this mausoleum. In 1974, this mausoleum was found by a group of Chinese farmers. Most of those farmers met an unfortunate fate, with one even taking his own life. So do you think that there's actually spirits down there in that mausoleum that are working overtime to protect Qin Shi Huang's grave? Probably not, but it's pretty cool to think about. Bog Bodies of Europe. Within the peat bogs of Europe lie tons of perfectly preserved bodies. These people are mummified, but they're the most perfect mummies you will ever find. The creepy thing about them? Most of them were probably murdered. I guess that makes sense, right? Thousands of years ago, whenever you wanted to kill somebody, you could just go dump them in a swamp and forget about it. Nobody would ever find those bodies, right? Well, they wouldn't for a long time, but they've been found now. Some of these bodies weren't just murdered, they were ritually sacrificed, and that's also horrifying. One example of this is the Tolland man. 2,400 years ago, he was most likely executed, and he still had the noose around his neck when we found him. Even worse than that was the Lindau man. This guy died around the turn of the eras between BC and AD. He died extremely violently. This guy's head was bashed in, his throat was slit, his neck was broken, he was stabbed in the chest, he had broken ribs. It was horrible. This one, I don't see how you can make a ritual sacrifice out of this. This was horrible. Somebody murdered this man. There are tons of other bodies like this in the peat bogs of Europe, so if you ever go digging down there, be careful. The mummy from KV55. Now, I just talked about this mummy on another Iceberg video, but I didn't talk about this aspect of it. In that video, we determined that this mummy of KV55 is probably Akhenaten, who was also King Tut's father. If you know anything about King Akhenaten, you know that he overthrew Egyptian religion. He totally forgot about all that stuff, even transferred the capital of Egypt to a different place. He tried to unite Egypt under the new religion of Atenism, which worshipped the Egyptian sun god or sun disk Aten. This was a complete shift from the polytheistic Egyptian mythology religion that we know of. As a result of this, lots of people hated him. The gods themselves probably hated him if they were real. This mummy in KV55 shows damage. Like, they tried not to do a good job. They damaged his body on purpose. It was just pretty bad stuff. That itself can lend credence to the fact that this mummy is Akhenaten because, like I said, people hated him. These Egyptian gods might have also cursed him and his bloodline. If you know anything about King Tut, he had genetic abnormalities. There were other people in that lineage with problems as well. Now, it could be the result of inbreeding, or it could have been a curse from an Egyptian god. Now, it was probably the results of inbreeding and just awful stuff like that that went on in ancient Egypt, but anyway, it could have been a curse from an ancient Egyptian god. Let me know what you think about this. I think it's really interesting. The Temple of Doom, or Chavin de Huantar. This is an ancient temple site in the Andes Mountains of Peru. It was created and occupied by the pre-Incan Chavin people. Well, you've probably heard of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, right? Well, that's not exactly this, but it probably did inspire it. Within the walls of this temple are some absolutely horrifying carvings, paintings, stuff like that. There are stone faces of humans with long fangs and venom. Is creepy stuff. Snuff tubes made out of bird bones have been found all over this site. So if those artwork heads with fangs and stuff sounds like an acid trip, it was probably something like that. They were snorting all types of hallucinogens. There are also paintings of San Pedro cactuses, which are a known hallucinogen. Hallucinogen? I don't know how to say that word. There's centaurs, mermaids, sphinxes, crazy stuff on these walls. It's really crazy the stuff that they came up with. The paintings and the acid trips are cool, but the really creepy part is the acoustics of this place. The corridors are narrow. There are tons of tunnels. There is flowing water that affects the sound in this place. Everything in this place was creepy, and I imagine that it only exponentially grows whenever you're tripping on acid. This place was most likely a temple of the cult of the Chavin people. They would bring new people in, they would make them trip and go through this temple of doom, and then they would think that the gods were angry at them, screaming at them, and it was just crazy stuff. I could not imagine going through this place and experiencing this. That just sounds crazy. The Roman Catacombs shadow figures. Underneath Rome are over 50 ancient catacombs or underground passageways. These things are famous for being the resting place of a lot of people, mostly Christian people. These things stretch for miles, and they're literally like a labyrinth under there. There are official catacombs which allow visitors, allow tourists, stuff like that, and they do draw a lot of people in, but there's also ones that are off limits, and they're off limits for good reason. People that go into these forbidden catacombs report crazy stuff. Visitors report that there are shadow figures that dart through the tunnels, that there are voices echoing throughout the tunnels, that it's just wild. Lots of the catacombs that are open to the public have symbols and ritual objects from ancient pagan religions. I can't even imagine what the forbidden ones have. There are literally hooded skeletons in one of these not forbidden catacombs called the Capuchin Crypt. I don't care who you are, that's creepy. That's something you would see on Scooby-Doo. Other people that go down these forbidden tunnels would stumble upon great chambers where people had obviously been meeting. There were like paintings, there was stuff all along the chambers, but then when they would go back with somebody else, it'd all be gone. Even the police one time went down there to look at this stuff. They had video evidence of stuff being there, and when they went back, it was gone. And there was a note that said, "Don't investigate." Some secrets and some tunnels and the stuff that goes on in some tunnels should just stay secrets. Now let's move on to tier 3. The Zawiat El Aryan Unfinished Pyramid. This is an unfinished pyramid that lies in a military restricted zone between Saqqara and Giza. It was created in around 2500 BC, and it was discovered during the 19th century AD. Now this is basically a pit. They started digging bedrock for the foundation of this thing, and they never finished it. It was a base that was 660 foot long by 660 foot wide. Nobody knows exactly how big they wanted it to actually end up being because it wasn't finished. Now, one of the craziest things about this place, besides the fact that it's in a military restricted zone, is the fact that there are no hieroglyphics, there's no sarcophagus, there's no tomb, there's nothing like that. Most pyramids were meant to be burial places, resting places for pharaohs, but this one might not have been. Or they didn't get around to that part of the construction either way. The precision of this stonework is incredible. It's extremely advanced like a bunch of other things the ancient Egyptians had, but another thing is there's a perfectly oval granite tub that's in the center of this base of the pyramid, and it's literally cut around. It perfectly fits in there. They brought it in. It wasn't there. Nobody today knows what it was for, and the fact that there's no hieroglyphics left, there's nothing like that, it's pretty creepy. It's like they were trying to erase all traces of what this was supposed to be. Some researchers that actually got to look at this place before it was military restricted say that it like gives them a impending sense of doom. So was this supposed to be a burial chamber, or was it supposed to be something even worse that we don't know anything about? Something that Egypt wanted to forget. This one gives me goosebumps, honestly. The Olmec colossal heads soul trapping theory. Alright, so the Olmec colossal heads are giant heads that are carved out of basalt blocks from the Olmec period in like ancient Mexico. They range in height from around 4 foot tall to 12 foot tall, so some of them get real big. They're very distinct. You'll know these things if you see them. You've probably seen them before, and if you see them once, you'll never forget them. So traditional wisdom says that these things represent ancient rulers of the time. Rulers would be in power, and they would get one of these things carved after their visage. These heads would end up sort of like the Easter Island heads. They would watch over the people for the generations to come. A new theory has emerged as to what the true purpose of these Olmec heads was. It's not a memorial. It's not something that's going to oversee the civilization. It's a prison. It's a prison for the souls of those that they encounter in battle and kill. Captured enemies, sacrificial victims, people that they just didn't like and killed. Their souls would end up being trapped in these heads. There's not that much evidence to back up this theory, but these heads, most of them anyway, were buried under the ground before around 900 BC, which was, they were still going on. The civilization was still going. These people buried these heads for a reason. Their enemies' souls would be captured in these stone heads, and then they would bury them in the ground. They were there forever. They would never go to any afterlife, anything like that. They were in those blocks. Now that's pretty creepy, if you ask me. Ancient massacre at Catalhoyuk. Alright, I had never even heard of Catalhoyuk until just now. So this was an ancient city in like the Turkey area, like most of these ancient cities were, that was established and existed from around 7500 BC through like 5600 BC. This was apparently one of the world's very first cities. Apparently women pretty much ruled this society. A man would follow his wife's parents, and households would be passed from mother to daughter. Now none of that really matters. What's this thing about an ancient massacre? Well, to first understand, you got to realize that this civilization was one of the first farming communities. They weren't really hunter-gatherers. They were together in the city, and they were all farming, doing their part. Ancient nomads that were hunter-gatherers were able to just leave people they didn't like. So if you got in a fight with your neighbor, you could just leave because you're a nomad. In a farming community, you can't do that because they're invested in that land just the same as you're invested in your land over here. It's like the Hatfields and the McCoys. They're shooting each other over a river. So these people, much like the Hatfields and the McCoys, were forced to kill each other if they didn't like each other, because that's how people were. They were savages back then. Apparently these people weren't just mad at each other and fighting like that though. They had something called a death cult, most likely. There are skulls plastered into these walls in these ruins sometimes. These heads were removed from the bodies of the people that, you know, were there. They were plastered over and set in these walls. It's almost like these skulls were watching over the households of the people that were still living. Maybe when a neighbor killed your brother, you would take your brother's head and put him in the wall so that he could still be part of that household. Who knows? In some of the research of the area, there have been 93 skulls found, and up to 25 of them have multiple head fracture wounds. And I say multiple because it looks like they've been fractured and healed and then fractured again like 5 times a piece. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would want my brother's skull to be in my wall over here looking at me every time I'm recording a video in here. These people were weird at the very least, but they might have been just malicious at the worst. I don't know about this ancient civilization, but I know that even as bad as we have it today, we have it exponentially better than they had it 9,000 years ago. The Nazca lines blood offerings. The Nazca lines themselves are an ancient mystery of the world that we've gone over before, but what are these blood offerings? Well, first off, the Nazca lines are massive geoglyphs in the southern desert of Peru. They depict different animals, shapes, figures, stuff like that. I'll throw some images on screen for you to look at here. There are tons of theories as to what these things were actually created for, ranging from like alien landing strips to astronomical calendars to offerings to gods, which we're going to talk about some more here in a little bit. But anyway, there's tons of theories out there. There's a theory out there that says that these things might have been part of a ritual that was meant to help them summon water to, you know, it's a desert area, but they were trying to grow plants and stuff. This might be true, but there's something that we can add on to that. Alongside these lines, there are tons of burial sites, and in these burial sites are the bones of both animals and human remains. Many of these human remains have been shown to have their hands bound, face face down in their graves like they were part of a human sacrificial ritual. They were in the desert and they had no water. What else could they do other than pray to their gods that there would be some rain, and when the rain didn't come, kill somebody they didn't like, and maybe that'll be enough. Some of these burial sites contain up to a dozen of these bodies with their hands bound. These people were getting rid of the people they didn't like. It's not great. It's not good at all, actually, but maybe they wanted some rain. Now, in Spanish colonial records, there are records of the indigenous people of like South America, Mesoamerica, that area, doing blood offerings, and this could stem all the way back to the Nazca people over here. In these offerings, they would get the blood of these people that they were sacrificing, they would put it in stone jars, and they would put it in sacred waters. I guess that was supposed to be some type of activation so that they could get rain from the gods. Behind everything that's beautiful is an ugly truth for the most part. These lines are cool, but in the end, it's just kind of horrifying. Mesopotamian demon bowls. Demon bowls, or incantation bowls, were clay bowls that were created in Mesopotamia between the 6th and 8th century CE. Supposedly, they were a form of protective magic against demons. Apparently, these days in Mesopotamia, there were quite literally demons and spirits underneath the floorboards of people's homes. As a result, these bowls would be buried upside down underneath every single home there. No joke, every house from this time period, when excavated now, has one of these bowls facing down because the spirits apparently went under it and got trapped, but they had these under there. There would be spiral incantations and stuff written in like an ancient Aramaic script. These incantations were meant to attract and trap these demons. Lots of this demonology relates back to ancient Judaism, and especially the ancient she-devil demon Lilith. She was apparently the first wife of Adam, and it was just a whole weird thing. All three of the big Abrahamic faiths has something to do with this, and they were all in Mesopotamia even at the same time, so honestly I don't even know what was going on there. All of them wanted to trap these demons in these bowls. For some reason, everybody, no matter who they were scared of these demons. So were they really real? I mean, I doubt it, but you never know. Let's move on to tier 4. We'll start this off with the Headless Pyramid of Saqqara. Alright, so this is a pyramid complex, but we don't exactly know who this pyramid was dedicated to. It can be attributed to either Menkauhor or Merikar. Now, Menkauhor is of the 5th dynasty and Merikar is the 10th, so that's a lot of time in between there. So it could date all the way back to 2600 BC, and that's the most likely scenario, or it could be sooner with that guy of the 10th dynasty. Just like a lot of other things, this thing is in Saqqara. Now, it's an unfinished pyramid complex, but we excavated part of it until we had to stop. We found some pretty cool stuff. We found a sarcophagus lid and some canoptic jars and other stuff like that, but we had to stop because of structural instability. At least that's what they want you to think. Now, there's obviously your traditional conspiracy theory type stuff. Workers were falling ill or feeling sick, stuff like that, but that's unconfirmed. What is confirmed is that there was somebody that said, so it's not actually confirmed, but anyway, somebody that said that there was a room in this pyramid complex that was giving off electromagnetic frequency like interference. All of their equipment would mess up whenever they were trying to work on stuff. That's pretty weird. Several workers also claimed that they heard voices coming from this pyramid complex. Now, that's probably a tall tale, but who knows? Now, the internal layout of this pyramid is another mystery in it itself. Also, it's called Headless because, like, most of the stuff on top, the superstructure or whatever they call it, is just gone. But the rest of the site, they were digging in there until they had to stop because of that weird stuff that was going on, right? They cited structural instability. The thing is, it seems like this thing keeps going down and it's almost impossible the way it was constructed. That's one of those things that the red tape holds us back from. We really don't know what's going on there. It's just really weird. Next up, we have the Saqqara Bird. Now, I've talked about this thing already like twice on different icebergs, but I've never talked about the creepy aspects of it. Basically, what this thing is a model falcon. It looks like it could be an ancient airplane. It looks like a model glider that somebody would create these days. That itself leads to all kinds of conspiracy theories as to if people saw ancient aircraft, like ancient aliens had aircraft that they modeled this thing after, stuff like that. The most likely explanation is that it was literally just a model falcon because the falcon was very important to the ancient Egyptians because of the god Horus and the god Ra. This thing cannot fly, but if it had like a vertical stabilizer on its tail, it probably could. Well, that, and if it was made out of lighter weight wood. It could have been a child's toy. It could have been some kind of weather vane. There's all the kinds of things that it could have been, but why is it mysterious? Why is it creepy? People say that this thing can actually fly if it were to be scaled up, but there's also a curse on it. I don't think it's an actual curse. I think it's literally just people being crazy on the internet and talking about random stuff. Like, I think some museum workers even say that within this display case, nobody will have touched it at all, and they'll come back to it the next day and it's in a different position. That's not real, most likely, or if it was, something bumped it. I don't know about this. I know that there are a lot of really weird things that go on in Egypt, so this thing, if it were like cursed or if it was possessed or something by the dead, wouldn't surprise me. The Naga Fireballs. Alright, so the Mekong River is a river in Asia that separates a bunch of different countries, but right now we're going to talk about Laos and Thailand. Once a year, traditionally thought to be on the last day of the Buddhist Lent, is during a full moon, there's this phenomenon known as the Naga Fireballs. Now what this is quite literally glowing orbs that rise up out of the river. Sometimes people say they're up to like the size of a basketball. Supposedly they rise a couple hundred meters before they just disappear. They are reddish in color, and there's been stories about these things for centuries. Not just stories though, there's literally pictures of them, like photographs. People have actually taken pictures of these things. These things used to be known as ghost lights because, I mean, look at them. They are most likely not man-made. The Laos authorities actually proved this pretty much during 2021, during the COVID lockdown. They monitored everywhere, so anybody that would have been creating these things, shooting artillery or something in the air, they couldn't do that. Nobody saw or heard anybody do this kind of stuff. So where do these lights come from? Scientists try to prove that these are naturally occurring gas bubbles or something that just explode in the air and look like literal fireballs. The locals think that it's more of a Buddhist thing. They link these fireballs to the ancient serpent Phaya Naga from the ancient Buddhist texts. That's where they get the name Naga Fireballs. This serpent supposedly resides in this river. He guards knowledge, secrets, stuff like that. At the end of this Buddhist Lent every year, he sends up his own fireballs as a tribute to the Buddha. Now, I don't know anything about Buddhism really, but this is awesome. I mean, if this stuff is real, if that's what's causing it, which that's probably not what's causing it, it's definitely explainable somehow, but anyway, it's crazy stuff. Ancient Greek zombies. Yes, I know I'm in a different shirt. It's a different day. This has been a long recording, so now let's get into it. In ancient Greece, there was a legendary creature known as a Vrikolaka. Now, what these Vrikolakas were basically ancient Greek zombies. They eat that flesh and they have the appearance of what you would think to be a zombie. So that's where we get Greek zombies. So where do Vrikolakas come from? Well, the ancient Greeks believed that if you lived an unholy life, a sacrilegious life, you could become this Vrikolaka after death. You could do that, or you could be excommunicated from the church, or you could just be buried in like unconsecrated ground, so like not sacred ground. Sometimes when ancient Greek people would die and the people around them thought they didn't live a holy life or whatever, they would literally put rocks and stuff on their corpse so they didn't rise out of the grave as a Vrikolaka. Alright, so this is really just a fun one. It's not that creepy because this is off the wall stuff here, but there was a superstition in ancient Greece where these Vrikolakas would rise from the grave. They would roam around the towns, they would cause havoc, wreak havoc, whatever, eat people, I guess, eat their livers, but they would knock on people's doors. They would only knock on your door once, but if you answered it, it said that you would die a few days later and become a Vrikolaka after your death. As such, the ancient Greeks didn't open their doors until the second knock. It's pretty funny. Also, Vrikolakas were basically invulnerable. You couldn't really harm them except for on Saturdays. On Saturdays, Vrikolakas stayed in their graves, so that's when you need to go to their grave and stab them, literally, or burn them, or whatever. This stuff is super funny to me that the Greeks actually had superstition and legends around these things. They really thought zombies were real. The Necromanteion, or the ancient temple of the dead. The Necromanteion was an ancient Greek temple that was dedicated to the dead, literally. It was dedicated to the worship of Hades and Persephone. This temple was to both worship these gods, but also to communicate with the dead. The dead in ancient Greece were said to be able to foretell the future. They could solve problems that the living people couldn't, so the living people would go to temples like this to commune with them via necromancy. They would get their prophecies here. Now, the Necromanteion was near the Acheron River. In ancient Greek culture, this river was said to flow through Hades to literally water Hades, wherever that is. I mean, the underworld shouldn't have water because people are burning up there, but anyway, the ancient Greeks had a different idea of the underworld in general. The Greeks would use this temple to perform rituals to talk to the dead. They would literally eat a special meal and take some narcotics and then basically trip and see gods and spirits. I don't know. The historical accounts say that the people that did these rituals would quite literally see ghosts and spirits. And now that's probably because it's drug-induced fever dreams, but who knows? If you think there were really ghosts that they talked to there, let me know. Now let's move on to tier 5. We'll start with something that sounds like the Necromanteion itself, the Necronomicon of Nineveh. Nineveh was the ancient capital of the ancient Assyrian civilization. Within the ruins of Nineveh, archaeologists have found clay tablets that went on to inspire H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon. The Necronomicon is often referred to as the Book of the Dead throughout H.P. Lovecraft's works. It's basically an ancient Arabic grimoire that tells of the great old ones, so like Cthulhu and all those ancient deities that he made up. Now, it's widely known that this Necronomicon was written by an ancient mad Arab man who wrote it after studying like Babylonian and Egyptian ruins, stuff like that. The fact of the matter is this is all fiction. H.P. Lovecraft made this up. What he didn't make up is that there were actually texts like this that kind of inspired him to write this. These ancient texts from Nineveh say stuff about summoning demons, about great old spirits that we've heard of, like, you know, Marduk and Moloch, stuff like that. Supposedly these tablets mess with the archaeologists' brains that make them feel awful. It's crazy stuff. But here's the thing, this is probably fiction too. None of this stuff around a Necronomicon is gonna be real for the most part, or at least I don't think it is. H.P. Lovecraft was absolutely incredible at writing horror. He's one of my favorite authors ever. He inspired so many generations of our modern horror. But he also inspired works and fake discoveries like this that are meant to lead people off the course of actual history. So that's not a good thing. But were there evil spirits in ancient Mesopotamia? Could have been. The Abydos helicopter hieroglyphs. These hieroglyphs are part of a set of hieroglyphics in the temple of Seti I in Abydos. There are two hieroglyphs specifically that look like a helicopter and an airplane. It's basically an out-of-place artifact. Like, this stuff looks literally like we had a helicopter from today and they just carved it in ancient Egypt. The practical explanation is that in Seti I's time, he had stuff carved into here. It's his hieroglyphs. And then later on, his son, Rameses II, I believe, he had Seti's wall plastered over and he had his own stuff etched into the wall. So it's like overlapping hieroglyphs that eventually some of the plaster peeled off and it just combined them. And today it looks like a helicopter and an airplane. That's probably true, but how in the world were there two of them? I understand a helicopter, but right beside it, there's also an airplane? That's where our other theory comes in. These hieroglyphs represent stuff that we shouldn't even know about. It was forbidden knowledge in ancient Egypt. This theory says that this ancient wall itself serves as an ancient data storage. It basically stores data from this ancient civilization in case ancient Egypt collapsed. All this ancient knowledge that they had, which we actually don't have today, but we see this stuff on the wall right here. You know, it could have been that's what it was. This isn't really horrifying in that sense, but it's horrifying to know that if there was actual ancient knowledge that was put on these walls that ancient Egypt had and we don't have today, it's unfortunate. The Book of Thoth. We're staying in ancient Egypt here. The Book of Thoth was once thought to contain knowledge about the gods and the universe that we should never even know. If you said the stuff in the Book of Thoth out loud, you would have power over the gods and over the world. The unfortunate part about this is that anyone that looked at the Book of Thoth and ever had it ended up dead. Now, Thoth was the ancient Egyptian god of knowledge and writing. The ancient Egyptians called a bunch of different works the books of Thoth, and it wasn't really the same as what we're talking about right here because the writings of Thoth are really just the knowledge about how to write and stuff, but the Book of Thoth itself has some lore about it. Alright, so in ancient Egyptian mythology, the Book of Thoth was hidden at the bottom of the Nile River. It was locked in a box, and that box was guarded by serpents. An Egyptian prince went along and fought these serpents and retrieved this book for himself. Because he got the Book of Thoth, and this was very much forbidden, the Egyptian gods killed his wife and son. This guy was basically driven mad by this, and he ended his own life. The Book of Thoth was then buried in this guy's tomb with him. Generations later, it was probably 100 years at least, another Egyptian prince came along, looted this guy's grave for this book. He got the book, and then he was seduced by a beautiful woman who somehow convinced him to kill his own wife and children. Turns out this was the spirit of the first Egyptian prince that had the Book of Thoth, and it was all part of this curse. This new generation prince then went on to do what the old generation prince spirit told him to do. He wanted him to move his wife's and children's body to this tomb. So the new guy did that, and then the tomb was sealed forevermore. The Book of Thoth is down there in there, and hopefully nobody ever finds it again. Kind of like opening up Pandora's box. This is probably just a story, but one thing's for certain to me. If I'm ever on the Nile River, I'm not diving to the bottom and fighting snakes over a book. I'm just not gonna do it. The Tombs of the Giants. This is a megalithic gravesite with a collection of like 800 tombs. It's located on the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean. Now, these ancient graves date back somewhere between 2000 BC and like 1200 BC. Some of the graves in these sites are quite literally giant. Local Sardinian folklore says that back in the day when the first people were looking at these tombs, there were bones in there that would belong to people that were like 8 to 10 to 12 foot tall. Somehow, when official excavation started, these bones disappeared. Similar to that, there's Sardinian legends of giants that actually ruled over the island of Sardinia. There are ancient stone sculptures from Sardinia called the Giants of Monte Prama that literally resemble ancient giants. I don't know what more proof you need. Once upon a time, there might have been an ancient race of giants that roamed this world, specifically this island, but maybe this whole entire world. Who knows? We're talking about the Nephilim here. And that also begs the question, if these bones were in these graves, why would anybody move them? Where did they go? Like somebody was trying to cover up something they didn't want us to know about, right? The Whispering Skulls of Waxahachon. Waxahachon is an ancient sacred place of the ancient Mayan civilization in Guatemala. This place was first rediscovered in the year 1916. Since then, archaeologists have been digging it up and excavating everything, looking at everything they could possibly look at here. There's a little step pyramid thing here, which is cool in and of itself. I love that kind of stuff. But anyway, what's the deal with these Whispering Skulls? Whispering Skulls are pseudo-archaeology at best and completely fiction at worst, but they're pretty cool and pretty horrifying. Legend says that as archaeologists started digging up this civilization, they found a cache of skulls with holes drilled in them. Now, since they had these holes drilled in them, they could literally hold them up to wind or something like that, and the acoustics would come out the other side. They would make sounds. Researchers believe that these things might have been used in ancient religious rituals, or maybe for something even more sinister. They might have even produced voice-like sounds. Some researchers said that they heard voice-like things whenever they set these things out in the open elements, and they would literally think they had voices in their head. These things are creepy, and if they were real, I don't want any part of them. Tier 6. This is the depths of the iceberg. This is the stuff we don't know hardly anything about, and it's really creepy. It makes it even creepier that we don't know anything about it. The Nameless City beneath the Sahara. Now, this Nameless City is what I'm going to refer to as the Rekot structure. This is an actual geological structure within the Sahara Desert. It's also known as the Eye of Africa. It's an eroded geological dome that you can basically only see from the aerial view, but this view of it is absolutely insane. Well, I say you can only see from the aerial view. I'm sure you can see this if you walk up on it, but who's going to be walking through the Sahara like that? Not me. It's made of various types of rocks, and that's why it's still there after all these years in the middle of the desert. If you've seen a red dune, this is kind of like whenever a sandworm comes up. That's what it looks like to me. Now, once upon a time, this thing might have been a lost city. It's thought that the city that was part of this concentric ring of circles, or this dome, might have been something that predated all known civilizations, maybe even Atlantis. These concentric circles are literally what Plato described Atlantis as having been. Now, obviously, out in the middle of the desert, that's not an island. Once upon a time, there could have been water there, though. I'm not going to rule that out either, because this is still just a fringe theory. But anyway, if there was an ancient city here and it's completely gone, that's pretty horrifying. There's also speculation that there's something like a labyrinth here, maybe buried underneath the sands, and when people go down there, they never come out, which is in itself terrifying. Honestly, I don't want to be anywhere near this, and just that's why it's on tier 6 of this. We don't even know much about it to even yap about. The Black Pyramid of Amenemhat III. This pyramid is one of the original pyramids of ancient Egypt. It was constructed somewhere between 2000 BC and like 1650 BC. It was obviously dedicated to King Amenemhat III. Now, this thing's structure, because it was one of the original pyramids, was not that good. Like, its internal structures were weak. As a result of this weak structure, the pyramid itself has literally started to like collapse in on itself. Now, why is it called the Black Pyramid? Well, the tip-top capstone type thing on top of the pyramid is called the Pyramidion, and this one itself is made out of black granite. That's why it's called the Black Pyramid. At least that's why we think it was called the Black Pyramid. Alongside this, hieroglyphics have been found inside the weak structures of this pyramid that warn of eternal night. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound good to me. Also inside, it's like a labyrinth, and the structure itself doesn't really conform to normal geometry. It's almost non-Euclidean in nature. I was talking about H.P. Lovecraft earlier. This is literally something out of one of his stories, except it's real. Now, because of the weak interior structure, government officials have banned people from going in there at all and discovering anything. At least that's what they tell the public. In all actuality, maybe they're trying to hide something. Maybe something's there that shouldn't be there. We shouldn't even know about. But I don't know. I'm just a random guy that talks about random stuff on the internet. The Babylonian Gate of the Gods. The ancient name Babylon itself translates to the Gate of the Gods, but obviously there's going to be a reference to that somewhere in their history, right? Apparently in ancient Sumerian and Babylonian texts, there's references to an ancient Gate of the Gods. This quite literally allowed for travel or communication between the land of the living, like regular Babylon, and the land of their gods, the Anunnaki. Now, there's all sorts of conspiracy theories out there about the Anunnaki and how they might still be alive as lizard people running the government in shadow today, but I'm not going to talk about that much. in this video. This gate of the gods apparently allowed for these Anunnaki to come to our world and start our human race. This is crazy stuff. This is off the wall. Apparently they used in vitro fertilization to combine themselves with the ancient humanoid species Homo erectus to create us as humans. These Anunnaki might have been actual gods or demons or reptilian overlords or aliens, who knows? All I know is the Babylonian Gate of the gods supposedly allowed them to get from their world to ours, and it might still be out there today. There's even some ruins that people speculate was the remains of that, and it's not here anymore. There are some archaeological sites in Mesopotamia today that give off weird frequency readings, like weird electromagnetic pulls and stuff like that. I don't know. This stuff's really weird. That could also go back to like the Garden of Eden and all types of other conspiracy theories that we have no idea about. I'm just gonna stop right here. Let's go on to the next one. The Lake of Skeletons in Rupkund, India. This is a very real lake in the Himalayas, like 16,000 foot above sea level, where there's literally skeletons that date back thousands and thousands of years. This lake is full of hundreds of skeletons. Lots of these skeletons have skull fractures. Nobody knows how they died exactly. The thing about all these skeletons is that some of them date back to like 800 AD, some of them back to 1800 AD, and some are more recent than that. Some of these skeletons, like I said, have skull fractures, so a lot of people theorized that it was a giant hailstorm that killed a bunch of them. This actually lines up because most of them with skull fractures died around the same time, so there's that. There's obviously local legends that their gods killed these people for being intruders, but who really knows? Every year when some of the ice melts, new bones and new skeletons are found. So what do you think's going on there? Could it be something like Dialtov Pass? If you don't know anything about Dialtov Pass, it's one of the most egregious murder scenes that's not a murder scene probably of all time. It's like crazed hypothermic deaths that were just insane. You should watch a video about it. I don't know anything about what's going on there. Hopefully there's not a demon or a yeti or something out there killing people, but who really knows? What I do know is that our next and last entry on this Iceberg is probably my favorite on the whole thing. What if the gods were real? We just mentioned the Anunnaki. We talked about ancient Greek gods, ancient Roman gods, Norse gods, Egyptian gods, all these gods, God himself, the Christian God. What if they were real, or at least some of them were? There are references to deities all across every single civilization in ancient history. And while you can argue that religion is just a way to cope with the devious nature of the life that we live, maybe it's not. Maybe some of these ancient gods actually existed. The ancient Greek gods, the ancient Egyptian gods, the ancient Norse gods all had different functions, but they were all similar in certain ways. It's almost like there's a commonality between them. Maybe they existed once upon a time. Maybe these gods were all angels or something that united under the Abrahamic faith's God. I don't know, but I know that there were so many civilizations that were so similar yet so different, but they still had religious undertones that were very similar. I don't know. Maybe some of these ancient rituals, these ancient prophecies, all this stuff that we talk about and we somewhat ridicule nowadays, maybe it was all real, maybe it was all meant something. Maybe these ancient rituals to fend off demons and keep our gods here were real until they're not anymore because we quit practicing them. The scariest thing in all the world to me is that if some of these ancient gods and ancient demons were real, where are they now? Maybe one day we'll open up the floodgates and everything will unleash itself upon the world again. Maybe the great old ones from H.P. Lovecraft stories, maybe something similar to that is actually real. I don't know. What I do know is that I had an absolute blast making this iceberg video. If you enjoyed this video as well, hit that subscribe button for me. It helps me out a ton. Give me some feedback. Tell me what I can do better, what I can do different. Just let me know some stuff. I want to talk to all of you. We might have another Halloween-based video come out. We might not. This was a big undertaking for me, so I don't know how that's gonna pan out. But if you enjoyed this video, watch this video on screen if you haven't seen it already. It's the complete ancient mysteries of the world iceberg. It means the world to me if you would watch it for me. I think you'll learn a lot about a lot of stuff similar to this video. Thank you for watching, and until the next one, peace.